What's up, YouTube? So in this episode, I want to go through more of the hardware-based elements in my live performance and how I've linked them up to the Bitwig template that we've been looking at. So yeah, let's dive in and have a look. So I've been going through, these sort of audio and looping and track-based stuff with you guys in the last few episodes. But I've only kind of loosely touched on how I link up the hardware stuff and, how I perform it and things that I do either within the project or outside of the project and a couple of the hardware-based effects. So I told you guys in the previous episode that I've got 4 MIDI channels that I've loaded several, MIDI clips into. Each of them have a couple of MIDI devices. So I generally use a note pitch shifter, and this gives me the ability to quickly, octave shift it up or down. And this is pretty invaluable for not having to, tune oscillators and stuff to specific octaves if you need. Not every hardware oscillator has the ability to quickly switch octaves. And then I've got an arpeggiator, which is generally off, but I can sometimes switch it on to quickly generate ARP-like patterns on a, something, say for example, there's a MIDI clip that I've got loaded in that's not quite interesting enough. It's maybe just a flat note and I want to, jazz it up a little bit. Then I'll just switch on the arpeggiator and change some of these settings and let that play for a while and maybe just adjust some of the gate stuff live in the actual rack. So each of the tracks basically has note pitch shifter, arpeggiator, and then on channel 3, this is where my audio comes back in from the Eurorack. So this is the dry channel where I've got a tuner. This is where I kind of tune up my oscillators and stuff before I start the performance. And then I've got the effects output. So this is the stereo output that's basically coming out of the U dervish or the micro dervish, which is like the ping pong delay that's in the rack. And this runs through a reverb. So all of these channels then run into this live synths group, which I have EQs, and then I sometimes mix in a bit of reverb on this one as well. So this will give a little bit of reverb to the actual dry synth channel alongside some more reverb to the synth channel. So it's like a kind of overall reverb effect, which I'll kind of mix in, and again some more EQ. And then, like I said, I've got the Chris Glitch effect over here, which I'll then use the controller to kind of mix in as I need. So I think that kind of covers, what's happening there in terms of the effects, some of the MIDI devices. So let's have a look at what's actually happening on the Launchpad and on my MIDI controller. So this bit is probably more applicable to those who own a Launchpad or any type of pad-based controller. That being said is, I kind of just want to show you guys everything that's going on for the entirety of this video. So basically, along the top, we've got our navigation controls. So this obviously gives us the ability to, navigate downwards through our different tracks. As I said earlier, just using coloring of clips, I'm easily able to see where this track finishes and this one starts. And also these colorful clips along the side here, these represent those tempo scenes, which I spoke to you guys about. So generally speaking, how I go about launching a clip is by pressing these buttons down the side here, because what that's going to do is it's going to launch the entire scene. And from there, I can go and adjust things. That being said, is you've obviously got more than one finger. So rather than clicking, you can launch several scenes at a time. But, to get the master tempo clip, all the synth channels, everything to go at the same time, I find it much easier to just launch the scene and then adjust from there. Say, for example, I want to launch this scene, but then I don't want to have percussions in it. Then I'll do something like this. So anyway, then we've also got the ability to stop clips along the bottom here. So we can stop all the clips in the project by just pressing them one by one, like that. And the cool thing about this is you can either press it on and then press them, or you can hold it in, press the button, and then release. And it kind of does it much more, intuitively. So depending on how you want to do that, that's one of the cool things about the Launchpad, is a lot of these sort of little intuitive things. You've also got mutes, solos, that kind of thing, volume control. But that kind of thing I generally like to do on the other MIDI controller. Basically how I've got it linked up. I still need to assign a couple more things. I want to do some of the buttons so that they, trigger effects on and off and that kind of thing. But for now, I've kind of split it up into groups of 4, depending on how, relevant each thing is. Obviously, I've got 8 channels of MIDI and all sorts of stuff in the rack. But say, for example, these 4 are the volumes here. So it's kick and bass, percussions, synths, and then sound effects. On the actual hardware synth, I've got different volume controls on the mixer there. So I don't need to assign those individual volume outputs on the MIDI controller because I've got the hardware for it, if that makes sense. And these controls here, these are mixing in the amount of that retrigger of the Chris Glitch plugin. So like I mentioned, I don't have it on the sound effects channel, but I've got it on the synths group. So this is like the kick and bass, this is the percussion, this is the track synths, this is the hardware synths group. So these 4 mix in that kind of like amount of glitch that happens over there. And then over here I've got the filters, so it's kick bass, percussions, synths, and sound effects. And I still need to assign a couple of effects on here, a couple of effects on here, and like I said, the buttons as well. But that gives you a quick reference of kind of how I'm playing that side of things. Okay, so I want to give you guys a quick run through of the hardware aspect of my live performance setup. So this here is the Hex Inverter Mutant Brains. That's basically a MIDI converter. So that takes the MIDI signal from my DAW and splits it into CVs and gates. How I've set it up is I've got 4 voices of pitch, which I then send to my 4 voice oscillators. And then I've got various different gate systems. So I've got one that's timing the effects and then other sort of clock divisions and stuff on the other outputs. So along the top I've got my main voices. I've got the Waldorf NW1 that does my kind of melodic lead type of stuff most of the time. It's pretty cool for like squelchy, goer type leads. And then I've got the Mind Phaser that's doing most of the FM, PM stuff. Also lots of like gated rhythmic stuff that I do on there during the live performances. The Bassimilus Iteratus Alto, quite similar, just a sort of quick FM hit. Sometimes use that for melodies if I enable the arpeggiator inside Bitwig and stuff, but hopefully I've explained that for you guys already. And then I've got Plats. This is very cool because it's got several different modes that you can quickly switch between, but I generally just leave it on the sort of vocal synth mode and then send a couple of different modulators through to these parameters. But having the extra modes is cool in case you've got an idea that you quickly want to pull off. So basically those are the 4 voices. Those 4 voices feed into various different filters along the bottom here. So the second row would be most of my modulators and filters. So I've got the Waldorf running into a Pico VCF3. I've got the Bassimilus Iteratus Alta running into the Hex Inverter Red Dragon. And then the Plats is running into a Mutable Instruments Ripples, or it's a clone of a Mutable Instruments Ripples. So the Mind Phaser I actually don't have going through a filter. I find that you've got enough sonic range using the Wave Shaper and various sort of built-in routing that you can get such a wide variety of tones that you actually don't really need a filter, specifically for the more FM stuff. But that being said, is I can always unpatch something and patch it in. Sometimes I actually don't use the Basimilus as much as I used to now that I've got the Mind Phaser. The FM and PM here sounds just so much better. Sometimes I'll just swap that input in there if I need some filter on it or something like that. So having them next to each other does help. In terms of the modulators, my main source of randoms in the rack at the moment are the Wogglebug and the Mutable Instruments Marbles. So I generally have them unpatched when I start up, just because I can quickly just patch it in. And I'll generally leave the system patched like this for my live performances. So it gives me the ability to kind of create new stuff on the fly. You know, say for example, variations on where these randoms are going. So it's not always the same kind of outcome, if that makes sense. Here I've got the ornaments and crime in my live performance. Generally, I use this in peaked mode. So it's a quad envelopes. And then the bottom inputs here, these are the CV controls for the different decay amounts. So this is handling most of the envelopes in the system. And as you can see, I can just patch them in as I need. So yeah, that should explain most of what's going on there. Here, I basically got, so like I was explaining, I've got the pitch running into each of my voice oscillators. So here, this NW1 I've actually got running into a mult and then into the module. So this gives me the ability to, you know, I can send this pitch anywhere in the rack. You know, I could pitch control this oscillator to a melody within the Mind Phaser while having the carrier oscillator doing like a FM type thing. So, you know, I've got that versatility, which is pretty cool if I want to do a melodic thing. So my main melodic source has got a mult in case I want to send that elsewhere in the rack. So the bottom row here, let me explain some quick things for you here. Most of these I don't actually really use. These are just kind of placeholders for future stuff. I might get some more effects and stuff to run alongside the mixer. But the main use of this bottom part is I've kind of got an oscillator and an LFO. This oscillator is basically running at very low pitch. So this is doing my LFO type stuff. And the reason I've got another LFO going into the FM of this oscillator is this is basically changing the speed of the LFO. So essentially what I generally use this for is a sine wave LFO that I can patch. I mean, just, you know, straight off the bat, I generally patch it into the spectrum input of the wavetable. So that's just a LFO that kind of changes speed over time. There's not really any kind of way I can tempo sync it or anything like that. But that being said, it's a really nice source of kind of semi-random-ish modulations within the patch. And I can very much change the speed at which it changes, make it more stable by just turning down the FM amount and stuff like that. So that's very, very handy little LFO system that I've got here. I can also just patch these outputs directly into anywhere I need. Say, for example, I don't want that kind of moving LFO. I want something more stable and slow. I can patch it directly out of the LFO. Or if I want something more, high-pitched, I can patch it out of here. This is actually running into the second mult over here. And then I've got this little guy patched in there just to make it easier. I don't have to climb in there to try plug it in. I can quickly just plug LFOs in wherever I need. So I could say, let's say, put an LFO on there. Say, put an LFO on something else as well. So that's pretty handy. So then here the mixer, this is like my main performance element in the rack at the moment. Reason being is it's got these sends. So these are sending to the U Dervish, which I generally have on a clocked sync ping pong delay. And then what I'll do is I'll just mix in the send and, you know, get this to send a bit of that signal through to the delay and then have it delaying off for a while. And then this would be like the feedback amount. So I can kind of create these pad-like textures just out of sending a bit of the signal through and, you know, mixing it with various other sources. So that's a very nice way of creating like a texture or something. And it's quite unique every time depending on how you're creating your modulations and stuff within the patch. And from here, I've got my main output and then a stereo output. Those go directly into my DAW. A big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. Cool. I think that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to get through in this video. If you guys have any further questions, or if you want me to do any follow-ups on anything in a further video, let me know in the comments. As usual, if you like this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.